Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all the audience across Asia Pacific who have joined us today. Thanks for taking out time from your busy schedules. I hope today's session, which will be covering on how shifting security left can enhance your developer experience and productivity. I hope it's informative and useful to all of you. Let me start off with introducing myself. My name is Amol Raina, and I am part of GitHub Advanced Security team for Asia Pacific. I've been based in Pune, India, and I have been with GitHub for almost 2.5 years now. It's been an amazing journey interacting with customers across APAC and helping them with their DevSecOps initiatives. Uh, I have been lucky to be associated with cybersecurity and application security for almost 2 decades now. Uh, Thanking you again for joining us today for day two of GitHub Galaxy. Today's sessions are focused on the theme secure and reliable, and we have this fireside chat now. And later today, my colleagues Brent and Shlomi are holding an interactive forum and how to scale your security team and why. So, something to look out for. I also encourage you to watch the on demand videos from the GitHub Galaxy keynote as well as sessions from yesterday's theme, flexible and productive. We will post some links in the chat for you, so please watch out for them. Uh, Moving on to the housekeeping items, very, very important. Uh, if you have any questions for our speakers today, be sure to drop it into the question and answer tab. Today, we are also joined by developer advocate Michelle Mandring, who will be keeping an eye on the questions, which we'll cover towards the end of the panel. Some tips on optimal viewing experience. Be sure to join us from your desktop. We recommend using Chrome, Edge, or Safari. Firefox works as well with most of the current versions. If you aren't able to see the stream, try refreshing the page. If you are having trouble and are on a VPN, disable your VPN and refresh the screen, or try logging in by dropping the event link from your calendar into the incognito mode. Uh, if you need any help troubleshooting issues on the platform, please navigate on the over the docs tab on the far right to find the help documents. Okay, on with the show now. Let me start by introducing the speakers for today. We have Commander Deepak Singh. Commander Deepak heads information security engineering at FlipKart, which is a leading e-commerce giant in India. Commander Deepak brings with him a rich experience of 20 plus years in defense services and cybersecurity both. Our second speaker for the day is Mr. Hilal Lone. Hilal is currently the CISO with Razorpay. Razorpay is a leading fintech company providing payment gateway services to our vendors. Hilal has in past worked with unicorns like Dream11, Trevolika, Intuit Extra. So a very warm welcome to both of you. In our discussion today, ladies and gentlemen, we will be trying to understand how organizations are working towards successful DevSecOps deployment in their organizations. And in this DevSecOps deployment, what kind of challenges do they face? Some focus will also be on the fact that how GitHub Advanced Security has been helping these organizations overcome these challenges. Well, to start, I think I've been fortunate to be associated with application security industry for almost a decade now, and be part of a lot of DevSecOps transformations in many organizations. Organizations today want to automate application security and are really looking to shift left, provide developers with a better experience in identifying and remediating security issues, which is kind of leading to a higher remediation rate and also productivity increase. In fact, I was going through a report published by CIO magazine, and as per the report, 74% of IT leaders have confirmed an increase in accelerating security initiative when it comes to software development. So why is that really happening? Why are organizations really focusing so much on application security and DevSecOps? So let's talk about few main drivers. I think you will all agree with me when I say that data breaches have been on a rise. 60% of these successful breaches are actually targeting application level vulnerabilities and in some form stolen credentials. Uh, Compliances have been getting very, very stringent. ISO 27001, GDPR, AutoSAR, CERT, RBI guidelines. There are many guidelines and compliances, and thanks to these compliances getting stringent, organizations are really looking at security, application security very seriously. Uh, Businesses have to go digital now to stay in the race, and that's led to a boom in development of mobile applications, web applications, and more code means more security issues. Number of releases have been going up for applications. The use of open source has been going up. Almost 70 to 80% of the code that forms composition of the software today is open source. So these are few main drivers which have really been kicking in the need to look at application security very, very seriously. So moving on to our guests today, I will start by asking my first question. So Hilal, the first question comes to you. You've been working with a lot of organizations in the past. You worked with fintechs, you worked with unicorns, and you've been associated with cybersecurity and DevSecOps primarily. So, what's been your experience? How has the journey been uh, with respect to DevSecOps with these organizations? And what were those challenges that you faced while implementing DevSecOps, with these organizations that you worked with? Hilal, over to you. Hilal, you're on mute.
Sorry. So thank you, Amol. I think with respect to basically the journey in DevSecOps, right? So it has been everybody who has been trying to basically like implement it, it's like rewarding and challenging at the same time, right? So it can be at times frustrating as well, right? There are a lot of different basically challenge that we face when we are trying to implement basically like DevSecOps. One of the primary reasons basically the organization moved on from basically waterfall models and other ways to work towards agile systems and all that, or even continuous delivery, right, was to basically increase the frequency of the releases, make development process efficient and everything, right? So when basically we talk about the challenges, actually there are two main challenges that we usually have in implementing DevSecOps. One is from the basically the technical perspective, and the another one is from the people perspective. So from the technical perspective, you have like really distributed way of development. There are like more than one release pipelines. There are like multiple different platforms that you actually work on, and there is no consistency. I mean, there is some consistency with respect to compliance and other requirements, but there's really a very limited amount of mapping done to basically the compliance requirements, right? Apart from that, there is also this challenge of basically making sure that people are ready to understand that they are going to be sharing some of this responsibility. And the general apprehension that people usually have when they think of DevSecOps is that, okay, now this is going to be an additional thing that we have to do. And it's sort of like going to make our basically development lifecycle a little bit more complex, which might introduce basically failures that they have not anticipated before. And some of these are basically something that needs a lot more basically like convincing. We need to basically like talk to people and make them understand how this actually does not slow them down. And that's actually one of the major challenges from the non-tech perspective. From the people perspective as well, there's like people are very sort of like not necessarily in the development world is not necessarily like security focused. So security is normally like seen as a like a somehow like a blocker for the development exercises, right? So to be able to convince them that, okay, yeah, this is not going to slow you down, the release cycle is not going to be stopped because of this, and this is something that will empower you rather than actually inhibit you. So basically making them understand that is always going to be challenging. And this is the challenge that I faced through my DevSecOps journey, right? Apart from that, I think one of the most important aspect was that when we are actually planning for implementation of DevSecOps, what happened was there was no standardization of tooling and automation, right? So that's something that we had to basically think through. And once basically we had enough basically research done on automation and tooling, then we did actually like say that, okay, developers need these tools and all that. So in order for us to achieve that kind of synergy, the developers had to be involved, and getting time from them is always going to be a little bit challenging. So yeah, so both technical and non-technical challenges are basically going to be there when you try to basically like implement DevSecOps. But once you actually like basically like tame this beast, right? So what happens is that it becomes really rewarding, and I don't think that anybody will regret actually going through DevSecOps journey.
Yeah, that I completely agree with you, Hilal, on the fact that this is not only a technical problem but also a people problem. So this basic friction that we've generally seen when security professionals try and implement security controls in the development cycle, and then there's a resistance coming in from developers in terms of, okay, this is slowing me down, and why do I have to even bother? My focus is features, functionalities. So completely in sync with you. Thanks for that, the great answer. Moving on to Deepak now. Deepak, so FlipKart has been using GitHub Advanced Security for a few years now, and as Hilal emphasized the challenges. So could you give us some pain points that you were able to overcome using GitHub Advanced Security? Probably shifting left or PR integration, whatever. So probably your thoughts on that.
Hi, Amol, and thank you, Hilal. I think a wonderful perspective, and I think the problem is across the board, right? Somehow,
Your voice is resonating. Maybe you want to check again.
so is it okay now?
Yeah, perfect.
So yeah, on that account, Hilal, thank you for that perspective. And Amol, while FlipKart, as you all know, started up, as a startup maybe around 8 to 9 years back, and of course, it was the entire emphasis was only on development, right? Somehow getting the entire code to production, number of releases, and all that. So there was too much of exuberance around development, and of course, security at that point of time may have been an afterthought. I don't really say that now, but subsequently, I think there was a consensus that security needs to be taken along with development. And I still recall, I mean, from whatever I hear from my people in FlipKart, those who are old timers, the number of developers used to be around 5,200 when we started this journey, right? And there were a couple of folks from AppSec, and the entire code review used to be manual at that point of time. You go to the developers would make the code and then hand it over to security folks, go through each line of code, understand how the data flow happening, and the entire the configuration of the software itself. So I think over a period of time, as when the developers' strength went up, right, because eventually we all look to scaling up our operations. So even development also scaled up, and that is when I think the AppSec team also scaled up in terms of adopting these tools, these automated tools. Of course, the conventional tools like Checkmark and all 45 were used at that point of time, and then I would say there came the game changer, right? And that game changer was in form of GitHub Advanced Security. And that is where I think it's not only about identification of those vulnerabilities and asking the developers to fix it, but I think along with that also came those kind of code snippets where they also in a way they suggest remediation of those vulnerabilities, and that I think is a big strength, right, in modern tooling, including this GitHub Advanced Security. And that is where there was a kind of, I would say, an implicit AppSec evangelization, actually, where developers were able to understand the security risk associated with their code. And I think the entire journey was not only taken by the security folks, but it was also by the developers per se. And to be very honest, Amol and Hilal, I would just like to share with the audience here that for the last couple of time, my experience has been that most of these bugs run, you don't even go through the sec bug cycle. I mean, developers are able to resolve 70% of the bugs themselves. So in a way, this entire effort, entire journey of DevSecOps, I think we have come a long way in getting developers on this track along with the security folks. And I think to a large extent, the credit has to go for tooling like GitHub Advanced Security, which I think as more and more with time they have gone into sophistication, ensured automation in the complete sense. And today, when I say that developers are able to fix 70-80% of the vulnerabilities without even raising a bug about that, I think it is a great commentary on the efficacy of GitHub Advanced Security. So yes, I think it's a great tool. I would say it's a blessing, which probably the developers community was waiting for, and I would say an ideal recipe for DevSecOps, taking both the development team, of course, the operations team, and now the security team in this entire journey of DevSecOps. Much needed, and thank you, GitHub, for this particular tool.
Thanks, Deepak. That was really encouraging. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it is primarily the shift in terms of mindset, wherein uh, what GitHub Advanced Security does is basically changes the focus from security being only something to do with security professionals to really making it something which is for developers. Empowering developers, giving developers a better experience, which primarily leads to higher remediation rate, higher productivity, and all that. So I completely am in sync with you. Thanks a lot for those good words, Deepak. Very encouraging. Moving on to Hilal. So Hilal, I think in your first question you were talking about the friction that you see from developers, and the challenges that you had to face as a security team in terms of convincing the developers. Okay, this is really very, very important. So what steps did you take in your organizations to ease out this friction that you probably saw between development and security teams?
Yeah, that's a very important question, right? So because that's formed the basis of the success of the DevSecOps, right? So I think it's a three-step process, right? So I think the first one is basically like engaging the developers, like making sure that you have open communication channels and you have collaboration basically tools available. And there is an open forum for you to basically discuss the planning, the requirements, the controls, the governance aspect of DevSecOps, right? And of course, like it's very important to make sure that the developers and the security teams are perfectly in sync with respect to basically what is the objective and what's the end goal when we are starting on the journey, right? The second is basically like making sure that we enable the developers. By enabling developers, it's basically giving them the tooling, the automation that's going to be helping them basically simplify the DevSecOps requirements, right? I think you were just talking about the GitHub Advanced Security, right? So it's one of those tools that actually does that simplifies basically this process, right? And it's not just limited to that, right? So you need to have like a comprehensive tooling basically done for developers, and make sure that whatever you can automate, you have to automate. The way it actually helps is basically like taking away that fear of basically being late with the deliveries, being late with the releases and things like that, right? So I think once we enable the developers, I think it's going to be really super important to make sure that we also at the same time give them necessary training and the knowledge to use them effectively. And because they sit closest to the source, right? So because they develop the code and everything, so they have better visibility on the coverage as well. And if they can be sort of like be sensitized about what are the security requirements, what are the different best practices that we need to keep while we are developing the code, that's actually very, very important. And they do a much, much better job if they know exactly why they are doing a certain thing. We can give the recommendations, we can give them the playbooks, we can give them all sorts of basically checklists and things like that. But it will only go that far if they do not understand the importance of underlying basically the requirements, right? So it's very important for them to understand why we are asking them to do this and why it is necessary for us to basically do that. So I think enablement is like very, very important. And finally, I think one of the most critical part that we often do not talk about is basically empowering them. So empowerment comes from basically like making sure that we do, obviously like the training and coaching is going to be one of those aspects where we do that empowerment. But at the same time, we also need to understand that whatever security team used to be doing in the traditional way, where they used to give approvals, they had to like go through a lot of hoops, and they had to go through a lot of basically like back and forth communication on what can be done, what cannot be done. I think that should be delegated to basically developers as well. We should obviously like make sure that the security has the governance and the oversight, and make sure that they do the validation of basically the coding and whatever application development that we do in our SDLC. Right, so that obviously the job is with the security, but security should not actually be involved in the business as usual activities with respect to the developers. I think, and also the decision making with respect to adoption of the technology or the processes should lie with the developers as well. Of course, it's a collaborative activity, the security and the developers can have this done in a collaboration, right? But at the same time, we have to make sure that there is a governance on top of that, so that we do not miss out if, for example, basically something does fall through the cracks, right? So in summary, like, it's all about basically like engaging the developers, enabling them, and just empowering them.
I think, Hilal, you hit the nail when you said that it's important to empower the developers. I think that's the real game changer when it comes to successful DevSecOps deployment, wherein security teams primarily have to do governance part of it and let the developers be able to identify and remediate vulnerabilities in their workflows itself. So rather than they only focusing on writing the code on the features and functionalities, I think it has to come from top. It has to be a top-down approach, a boardroom discussion wherein they are aware about what really security means, what it means to really fix these vulnerabilities before the application goes into production. So I think that is really very, very important. And security taking least I would say least part in this entire activity, and letting developers be empowered and letting developers do majority of the things of fixing these vulnerabilities, as Deepak also said in the last his part of it, wherein he said that almost 70 to 80% of the vulnerabilities are actually being fixed by developers very early in the development lifecycle. I think that is what the whole shift that we all talk about, shifting security lift, is all about. So thanks Hilal, for those encouraging and very important thoughts. Moving on to our next question, that I think will be for Deepak now. Deepak, the market data tells us that there will be almost 500 million new applications, microservices being written and developed in the next 4 years. So much of code is being developed. How will software influence your particular business in future, and what role do you see security playing in that particular thing?
Yeah, so I think we are living in very challenging times, Amol, right? And as you said very correctly, I think there's been an explosive phase of applications, microservices. Overall, I think businesses are scaling up across the globe, right? And that is going to put tremendous amount of pressure on the developers community, right? The kind of development velocity they are looking at was something which was unthinkable in, I think, earlier times, right? But along with that, of course, I think all of us, I'm sure, with the exception of no one, that we are also sensitive about the security challenges these kind of development velocities bring to us, right? This is something which is known to right from the top of the leadership, right to the developer on the ground who is actually coding. He's also, I think, quite sensitized on the aspect of security. So when these kind of explosive application development is the present theme, I think there is equal amount of a responsibility on everyone, not on security folks alone, to incorporate security, to make much, I would say, to leverage that integrated automated tooling that we are talking about, that probably Hilal was also giving his opinion on. I think that is where we need to take developers on board. So this is only going to be possible when it is going to be a seamless collaborative effort, right? While of course the AppSec goes around the governance of this particular effort in terms of development, I think it's also equally, I think the onus lies on us to ensure that the continuous sensitization of the developers community, of everyone in this ecosystem, on the challenges of security in such an the environment where we are witnessing this kind of development velocity for applications. I think it puts probably onus on all of us, right? And that is where I think the security folks, the security teams, has to be particularly very, very aware, very, very cognizant of what are the tools that can address their challenges. They must be completely aligned with the developers, with the developers' agenda of high development velocity. And along with that, what is the associated security tooling which can, which the developers can leverage in a seamless fashion, right? So put together, Amol, I'd say that while I think as we get into this era of explosive application development, I think we also need to keep in mind the security challenges that come with that, and the continued focus to upgrade our security tooling in the development life cycle. And that, in my opinion, is going to be I think there's going to be a kind of a paradigm shift in way people, processes, and technologies, all of them are going to align with each other to ensure that we still have security while we have this high development, high velocity of application development, right? Putting them together is something which is going to be a collective responsibility. And yes, we are prepared for it. I think organizations are aware of it, and they're doing everything at their disposal to ensure that security moves along with application development.
Yeah, I think I am in agreement with you on that. Development velocity is all about DevOps. So we've been talking about DevOps for a good amount of time now. So agility, agile methodologies, developer velocity, I think is the key. And if you have to stay, businesses have to stay, competitive. Uh, you know, in fact, just to give you an example, a few years back when we used to interact with development community, we would generally see that every application would have maybe 3 or 4 releases uh, per year. That number has gone up to more than 100 releases every year. In fact, there are applications that would need a release every day. So that's the kind of velocity that we are looking at. That's the kind of development that we are looking at. And if this is the scenario where developers have to be on their toes, I think so much of code getting introduced. I think organizations really have to look at very new and innovative ways of introducing application security, ensuring that developers really are able to identify and fix these vulnerabilities rather than fixing these doing entire application security process very late in the development life cycle. So yeah, completely in sync with you on that. uh, in fact, with this particular thought of developer velocity comes in the thought that how do you really do it. And a lot of organizations have really tried to solve this problem by use of open source. So a lot of as I said earlier in my statement, that today almost 70 to 80% generally in the organizations, 70 to 80% of the code that forms composition of your softwares is open source. And while that's the right thing to do, but what the biggest challenge that now the organization faces, okay, what's the security threat or issues that this particular open source would bring in. So my developers would be using open source dependencies, libraries, but what's the risk associated with it? So maybe Hilal, your thoughts on that, how exactly you see open source risk, and how have you been taking care of this?
Yeah. So I think basically the open source, basically the 80% consumption in an organization, I think that's a conservative number. I think it's going to be higher, in my opinion. And I was recently in basically an event, and one gentleman said that even basically the code that's actually written custom, that's apart from the open source, right? So that also has some roots from somewhere else, right? So meaning, which is okay, because I have been a developer in the past, and I know to basically reuse some of the stuff from the internet is like always it allows me to basically do development fast, right? So there's always going to be a challenge, right? So there are obvious basically benefits by using open source. There's no denying that fact, because it accelerates the development, deployment, and everything, right? At the same time, like, it also brings in a very critical risk element into the development lifecycle. So what happens is that, like, you are always going to be unsure about basically what is my attack surface area if I do adopt an open source library or open source tool. And because the open source tools do not go through the rigorous basically development hygiene that we otherwise actually expect commercial application and basically all the other software to go. So there's always a chance that there is basically going to be some weakness in the software that we have not identified yet. And because the maintenance is so sketchy and maintenance may not be assured, so there is always a chance that we may be running something in the legacy that's going to be there forever, right? And it's only a matter of time before somebody discovers that flaw, right? So and it's a very scary thing, right? So for example, you have an open source basically software component in your code, and then you release that application, and now it's in a production, right? So it's an internet facing, people use it, your consumers use it, customers use it, and it puts your entire basically like application at risk, right? So So that's why it's very important basically to have mitigation strategies around it that limits basically the threat that can be that can exist because of this open source, right? We use a lot of different tools like dependency analysis, Dependabot, and things like that. Like, so a lot of different tools to basically identify them. And some of the breaches that have happened, and I think have been basically because of open source and because of supply chain attacks, right? And so I cannot basically emphasize enough like how important it is to basically have visibility into the open source environment that you have in your organization. And it has to be fixed at very early on, right? So you need to have from the acquisition itself, I think there should be a process. Like these days, I think we have some automated tools which do, like, I think everybody's familiar with a software bill of material and things like that, which is the old-fashioned basically software inventory, right? So basically, when we have that, and we need to maintain that, we need to ensure that there is constant monitoring and scanning and observability on those open source software to make sure that if a release is done, like, we need to update it, because we will not get notified of that. So we have to be proactive about basically making sure that all the open source software actually is risk-free. And as much as we can, we should limit their exposure in critical application, at least in the front facing, and at least where attack surface is actually much higher. So it's also that. So in summary, I think we are not going to go away from open source anytime soon, right? So the best we can do is basically have governance and monitoring, and keep as vigilant as possible, and use tools that are going to be helpful in either upgrading them or updating them, or making sure that they do not have any weaknesses, and test them from time to time if you have that kind of capability.
Yeah, Hilal, I think very important to use tooling, because yeah, as you said, open source is not going to go away. I think it should not, because it is the right way and right approach to basically achieving agility. But yes, what we could do is basically identify and mitigate the risk associated with bringing in open source code and dependencies by using tools like software composition analysis. You spoke about dependency review and you spoke about Dependabot. Yeah, so they are very good tools which help you identify vulnerabilities or security issues in these dependencies very early in the development life cycle. So basically the idea is that before your application goes into production, you should have identified these risks and should have mitigated these risks. So completely in sync with you on that. Moving on to our next question, that will be for Deepak. Deepak, I think we've been speaking about governance, and what security team should really do is governance and let developers manage the vulnerabilities and remediations. So now application security governance to manage the health of applications across your organization, it's very important, because that's the whole job of governance. How do you see what's the health of your applications? Are they getting scanned? What vulnerabilities do exist? How are they getting fixed? Which team is not doing it, and all that. And there are plans of integrating application security with SIM technology as well. So there are different SIM technologies. So what are your thoughts on the same, and how exactly are you managing governance in your organization, and what thoughts do you have when it comes to integrating application security with the SIM technology?
Hi, Amol. I think thank you for this such a pertinent question, right? And as I think Hilal brought out, right, with the again I would say explosion of open source, right, in the application development process, primarily to meet the business needs, right, to meet the, as I said again, the high the development velocities, why you need these source code components, and of course, as I said, this native organizational code is, I think, a myth now. Probably is a remnant of the past. We'll have to probably get aligned with this idea of using open source components, right? And of course, as Hilal brought out, for critical applications, I come from Navy background. From critical applications, I don't recall any of these open source libraries that we would have ever used, right? But that was where I think development velocity probably was not a challenge, was not the necessity. Now, along with this, now the moment I think you get into a concept of using open source components, which is a practical necessity, I think the challenges for AppSec governance only grows manifold, right? And this is something that there's been a lot of thought, a lot of deliberation at FlipKart itself, of my own organization, as to how do we prepare ourselves to take on these challenges of especially about scanning these open source components of vulnerabilities and trying to preempt any kind of a supply chain attack, right? We all know, almost as recent as I think a couple of days back, there was a very, very prominent breach about an open source library, right? I'm sure most of you would have read about it. The fact is that this can happen to anyone. It's a kind of a ticking time bomb, right? So it only goes on to probably reiterate the necessity of putting a very, very robust AppSec governance around it. And that one thought, I think, is about trying to do integration of SIM with the application security process itself. I think is going to be, again, probably a great enabler towards ensuring a robust security governance. So yes, Amol, that is already a discussion in my organization, right? It's about, I believe that GitHub, advanced security, I think they have those connectors which can allow us to get them to SIM. But I think the bigger challenge, which I feel, right, as something again which is being internally discussed, right, at a high level, while of course AppSec governance is required and the SIM integration is going to be playing a kind of instrumental role about that. But we also need to look at as to how do we build a process around it, right? For example, we do get notifications and alerts in SIM, and what next? Do you want to create those many seg bugs? You'll be running into thousands of seg bugs. Again, not a practical thing. Now, would you want to let these alerts and notifications, seamlessly flow to the developers so they get to see for themselves what they need to fix? Something that we are doing it as of now, but the scale would be much bigger when we integrate with the SIM. And so what we are right now looking at is, technically, this seems to be a very sound proposition, but I think internally we are trying to build a process as to what happens next. I mean, you are going to get, the SIM is going to give you that kind of visibility, that kind of threat intelligence about what kind of vulnerabilities can affect your application, and how do we respond to those kind of alerts, that some kind of threat intelligence inputs coming from SIM is a process that needs to be well defined, needs to be very well scoped. And I think over here, I would see that while people and technology are in place, we need to define the perfect process that will be able to adapt to this. So that, yes, Amol, I think, thank you for bringing this very, very contextual, topic. We are thinking very seriously about it. We are already aware that some of these top-end, e-commerce applications are already doing it. And trust to me, Amol, I think very soon you'll find, we see ourselves also into the same journey of, getting a SIM into this ecosystem of AppSec governance. Thank you.
Yeah, Deepak, that was amazing. So yes, I think I have been associated with DevSecOps for almost 10 decades. Sorry, for a decade. I'm sorry, not 10 decades. And one question that always was asked, that can your solution really integrate with SIM? So this was a very, very difficult question at that time, but very relevant as well, because what happens is, the biggest challenge that we have today with application security is, while you'll be able to identify and remediate majority of the vulnerabilities, but can you fix 100% vulnerabilities before your application goes into production? No, you can't do that. So what is it that you can do to at least prevent your applications from getting attacked or hacked despite having vulnerability? So that was a thought process. Can a threat intel be provided to the SIM, wherein they could basically monitor? So they would have a SIM, your SIM has idea on what kind of vulnerabilities are still open with your applications, and can that be monitored by your SOC team and prevented from getting breached? So yeah, I think this is, I know we both have been talking about this for some time now, and we've been discussing on this, but a very relevant and pertinent topic. I think GitHub Advanced Security is really working very seamlessly on this. In fact, we've already had integrations available with Sentinel, Sumo Logic, Splunk, and we are working on integrations with other SIMs. So another advantage that CISOs generally get is, now they don't have to look at multiple dashboards. They just have a single dashboard where they can get security reports from all their different technologies, now including application security as well. So yeah, I think that really is going to be the next thing when it comes to application security. Moving on to Hilal. So I think we spoke about developer empowerment. We spoke about how do you basically ensure that developers really are in sync with what's happening on application security. So what do you feel? I think you spoke about it, but I would want to understand in detail, on role of training when it comes to developer empowerment, in case of application security or DevSecOps. So how are you doing that?
Yeah, so it's going to be pivotal for the success of a DevSecOps program, right? So if let's assume for a minute, right? So we have a very well built CI/CD pipeline, and we have integrated all the necessary security tools and everything, right? And now each of those security tools is actually intelligent enough to give you the results that you need, but somebody has to decipher them, right? Somebody has to take action on them, right? So normally what happens, like if you implemented a tool, it gives a bunch of basically like results, and somebody has to go and say, oh, I had to basically assign some criticality to it, or I had to assign some severity to it. And that cannot happen if that particular person who's actually evaluating those results is not familiar with what exactly the result tool is telling him. So it's very important. Basically, the training and basically like I think training is going to be incredibly important for the development teams, and it's going to be one of the pillars for the DevSecOps, right? So and the way I see it is actually like it's one thing that actually will make or break your DevSecOps program. Developers need to be confident. They need to be basically like aware of exactly like how do they interpret not just the results, but also how to optimize those tools and how to basically execute those, basically the test cases that they may have, or execute any kind of security requirements that they have, right? So in order for basically like people to do basically all the training that's required, right? So it's very important that not only do we have like the tool specific training, we also have like a broad training around application security. So what that means is that you should have basically like subject matter experts who can actually come and basically explain to you like what exactly a particular result means, and how do you actually like assign vulnerability scores to them, and how do you sort of like fix them. So now there are different ways to basically like to basically train the developers around application security. You have like gamification of application security, which is catching on quite heavily, right? So which is actually interesting concept, where you have some small basically like application security exercises which are relevant to what you are doing or what you are actually developing, and that becomes really good tool for the people for the developers to use in order to understand basically the root cause of vulnerabilities, so that the vulnerability that's actually going to be recurring does not actually occur again. Similarly, like there are other things that we can do. For example, I think the Security Champions program, which I think is very common concept, right? So it's very important that you get basically some people from the development community, train them on the security, so that they can actually act as your extended hands within the development teams, and train rest of the teams, right? So and that's the way you actually like scale basically the training in your engineering organizations. Apart from that, of course, like you also need to have some specialized way of training the people on the automation that you have done, or basically making them familiar with the process, making them familiar with basically the different types of threats and vulnerabilities that we have in our software. In order for basically to be for us to basically deliver all of this successfully, right? So there has to be a metric based system, right? You have to understand that okay, if we actually do execute this particular knowledge base or this particular training program, how many people exactly did actually benefit from it, and is the number of vulnerabilities or issues that's coming down or going up? What is the quality of the security testing that's happening, and how secure are our products when they go into production? So all in all, I think it's a very comprehensive planning that needs to happen around security training and awareness. And it's I think without it, I 100% believe that it's not going to be a successful program, no matter how hard you try. You may buy the best of the tools, you may have the best of the continuous delivery pipeline, very smooth, very simplified. But if the developers do not understand what they are trying to basically prevent from happening, what they are trying to basically prevent from going into production, so it will be always a challenge. So in order for basically the engineering and the developers to benefit from DevSecOps, our training is going to be mandatory. And I would actually start with training, to be honest, right? So the journey should start from there, like from the awareness sessions, that, okay, what exactly is DevSecOps and how do we actually implement this? What are the different benefits that we get from it? And all that, once they have that awareness, they become your stakeholders in the entire operation. And once they become your stakeholders, right, so it's their responsibility as well, and they can own up the security tasks within that DevSecOps pipeline. And as Deepak was earlier mentioning, right, so we need to basically maintain the governance, but rest everything should be actually like offloaded to the developers so that they can take the decision that they need to make.
Yeah, in fact, I have been speaking to a lot of CISOs and engineering heads in organizations, and they come up with different innovative ideas, as you said, gamification of this entire learning, which is really innovative. Yeah, you can't just put people in classroom and boardrooms and just keep throwing theoretical information on them and expect them to be champions. But it has to be, I think, a continual process. A lot of hackathons are happening. In fact, I've seen organizations even uh, giving prizes as a motivation to these developers, and probably showing their names, top 5 guys or girls, doing activities, or the best people are in terms of who have security knowledge and all that. So yeah, I think this is something which is the right approach to if we want to really shift from or if you want to really shift security left, wherein we focus and empower developers in terms of being able to identify and fix vulnerabilities. So I had a few more questions, but unfortunately we don't have much time. So I would now have to invite Mish to join us on the stage. And hi, Mish. So probably you could go ahead and ask a few questions from the audience now.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. We have so many questions coming through from the audience. So I think the first question I'll ask is, GitHub Galaxy has covered a lot about AI and automation, DevOps and security. But what some of the people in chat want to know is, how do we actually integrate DevOps and security together? Maybe you two can talk about how you're actually implementing DevOps and security in your workplaces.
Okay, so let me take that one. So it's always about basically like it goes with the problem statement, like what exactly are we trying to achieve. So our basically like is basically making sure that we have enough coverage and we scale our security, right, and make sure that our products are as secure as they can be when they go into the production, right. So in order for us to basically take those steps, basically like to basically integrate security with DevOps, right. So it's always basically like important to understand very clearly what is on my release pipeline, like how it is actually shaped up, what are the frequency of my releases, and who are the people responsible for doing those releases. And once you identify that, okay, this is basically my development environment, this is basically the IDE that I use, this is my tool set that I use for development, then you have basically like your release pipelines, you have your code repositories like GitHub or somewhere you commit your code and what exactly happens there. Then you have your other tools that will be part of that CI/CD pipeline. So identify them very clearly, that which ones are your basically like pivotal tools in that particular pipeline, and where exactly can you integrate security, right? So each step of the way, you have to identify what is going to be the most beneficial tool or task that can be integrated with the DevOps pipeline. So one of the things, for example, at the IDE, you could do potentially do syntax checking for security vulnerability. You can do static analysis. You can do, then going forward, when you do code commits and things like that, you can do software composition analysis. You can do dependency analysis. You can do static code analysis. And after that, like when it goes to basically like in basically staging, so you have other tools basically that you can run, which will be like vulnerable scanning, dynamic scanning, and things like that. So you have, so it all depends on how your release pipeline is actually shaped in your organization, and what are the touch points that you have identified where these tools or these services can be integrated so that you get the maximum benefit. And it's least intrusive as well. So for example, in a continuous delivery setup, you don't have a lot of flexibility with respect to basically tools taking a lot of time to basically complete the results. So you have to also identify the basically potential risks that you actually be introducing when you actually introduce these security tools. It should not impact the performance. It should not impact basically the quality testing that it does. It should not impact basically the velocity of the releases, right? So once you have that, once you actually, that plan is actually, you have the problem statement, you have the release pipeline clearly defined, and then you have obviously the operational cleanup that you need to do, right? So once you have actually identified that, it should be a smooth sailing with respect to DevSecOps.
Fantastic. Do you want to answer as well?
Yeah,
Yep.
I think, yeah, just to Hilal, I mean, of course, I think Hilal so beautifully summed up, right, as to why we need to bring in security. I think it's important to take the developers on board, right? I think this whole, if you see, DevOps has evolved to, sort out certain operational inefficiencies between operations team and development team, right? Now we need to represent security in that chain. I think it's all about that, right? And so most of the times, as Hilal brought out, he was once a developer, right? So he now in the security side, he understands the nuances of security. So I think it's about a constant evolution of training and sensitization to the developers, right? You must use, in my opinion, what we do is every time there is a particular incident or breach which is reported in public domain, we try to take that as an example as to why we need to bring in security through the entire development life cycle, right? And as I think Hilal brought out, it's very important to define the problem statement, understand the CI/CD pipeline, pick up those touch points where you want to bring in security, and only security to the point that the developer is convinced is going to bring a lot of value add, right? And in a way, it should be seen as something which is adding to your probably throughput, because eventually if something goes wrong with security, you want to go come back, look at the code once all over again. So overall, I think security has to be seen as a terms of in terms of improving the efficiency, right? Contrary to the earlier perception that is going to block my my timelines to the door. I think we should look at is a holistic approach of building security right through the entire CI/CD pipeline and getting developers on board. Thank you, Hilal. Just wanted to add that point.
Yeah, I could not have said better. So really, really well done. Thanks.
Fantastic. I think we'll follow that line then of implementing DevOps and security, or implementing security throughout the entire development lifecycle. So to that point, how do we ensure that, because often within businesses, deliverables are quite tight and people want things now. And obviously, Amol, you mentioned the words a couple of times, empowering developers, and the word velocity. But how do we ensure that, we've got this urgency of deliverables, we need to integrate security throughout the development lifecycle, and we've obviously got regulations we often have to hit as well. How do we ensure we achieve balance between all these different things and ensure we have a really good product that is still secure?
I think it's very important that when choosing a solution, we look at, a solution which would help, as we all have been talking about, empowering developers. And primarily what that means is giving developers a better experience, because at the end of the day, it is the developers who are going to fix your vulnerabilities. So it's better you make them happy, you give them not only training and education, but you give them those tools and give those tools to them very early in the development life cycle. So the shift, the maximum shift left that you could do would help developers in the ability to fix vulnerabilities, identify and fix vulnerabilities. So the whole thought process that we've been discussing, and in fact GitHub Advanced Security also talks about it, is the approach wherein can we bring application security to developers' workflow? Can we empower developers to be able to identify and remediate vulnerabilities in their workflow itself? So rather than they going to different tools and technologies, today what happens is generally while we are shifting left, while we are talking about multiple different technologies, like software composition analysis to identify open source vulnerabilities, SAST to help you identify custom code vulnerabilities, secret scanning solutions, container scanning solutions. So there is so much that developers have to really do in terms of going into different technologies, trying to identify and remediate vulnerabilities. So I think very important is to bring everything together in one place and provide developers with a single pane of glass kind of a view, wherein they could identify and fix vulnerabilities from any kind of technologies that the organization is using. So it's all about giving developers a better experience. That's my thought.
Yeah, I think the audience would love to hear from you too as well. Just how are you within your organizations ensuring that you achieve that balance in your work?
Yeah. So as DK, want to go?
You're on.
Okay.
Real good.
So yeah, so as Amol mentioned, so it should have least amount of basically like interruption or disruption in their workflows, right? So they should be able to basically like use the results, use the DevSecOps automation or tools, whatever, in their regular workflow, right? It should be like a business as usual activity for them. It should not be seen as an additional thing that they have to do. They're already swamped with so many things that need to do, right? So they have to think about availability, resilience, they have to think about performance and everything, right? On top of that, we also expect them to basically make sure that whatever you build, it's actually secure enough, right? So, and this is important to basically for the developers to not get basically slowed down by this, right? So I strongly believe that like the automation that we build or basically whatever processes that we put in place for the DevSecOps, right, has to be in collaboration with the developers. So we should 100% have their commitment and their basically like inputs when we are developing these strategies. And only basically when they buy into it, and then it will be actually successful. So the least amount of basically intrusion that we can do, the better. And it should always be basically something that they enjoy doing, right? So rather than this being something, okay, this should not actually become like another checkbox, right? So another formality that they have to do so that they can get the release out of the door, right? So this has to be something meaningful. And as Deepak earlier mentioned, that there has to be some value addition because of this, and they should see that value addition. Only then, I think the DevSecOps program will be successful. Sorry, DK, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think guys have already covered it so beautifully, right? One last thing I wanted to say is also, someone spoke about gamification of security, right? You see, eventually security has to be development oriented, right? Unless and until we get them to understand the nuances of security, I think the effort wouldn't be really achieved in its entirety. And how do we do that? It's a tough challenge for security folks, right? So I think at that point, this is where we feel various other initiatives, sensitization, training, gamification, something which really comes as it's a very interesting concept where developers themselves, feel very connected to security. So the idea is that, as Amol also brought out, the more you shift left, right, I think most of these issues are already taken care of at the start of the development cycle itself. So when you probably, selecting a package for a project, you're going to write a test function, you're going to conduct some tests, and even you're going to conceive a kind of a deployment environment. So when that kind of project planning is happening, imagine if security is taken care of at that point of time. I think bulk of the journey we have covered very early in this development life cycle, and that is why I think it gets natively built into the process, and it becomes seamless to the developer, and the entire experience looks like as is business as usual, something which Hilal brought out. I think these are some of my thoughts, and moving forward, I think good tools like GitHub Advanced Security, I think is making a lot easier for the security folks to drive this message home to the developers community. That's all from my side on this.
I'm glad that the tools are making it much easier for you. So speaking of the tools, if you have a project, whether it's an open source project or you've just started something new or you're picking up a legacy system within your team or your organization, and it doesn't actually have any security in it that's been built throughout the pipeline, what is the best way to then add security on top? I think this question is probably coming from people who are building projects and going, oh, we actually don't have any security. So what are your thoughts on then adding that security on top of it?
So Mish, in interest of time, I think we just have a couple of minutes left. Do we want to probably...
Yeah, that was the last question. If anyone wants to take 30 seconds to add your thoughts, and then we can wrap it up.
Yeah, maybe quickly, DK or Hilal, just quickly.
Yeah.
What I can say, I come from that background where we had a lot of legacy systems to look after, right? And of course, if security was an afterthought then, what do we do now, right? I think this besides the challenge which I think Mish is bringing out, I think we don't have to really get too worried about that. Most of it, as I said, right, if you take a small deep dive into the security aspect, for example, static code analysis, right? If you do that kind of code analysis, we get to know the vulnerabilities in the code itself. There will be a lot of false positives. As I said, it has been a journey for everyone. So it's going to be for journey for those who haven't taken security at the start of the journey, right? So they need to get aligned with it. And I think it is also going to be an incremental journey, right? I think they do not need to get bogged down by too many other factors about ensuring security. Pick up one item at a time. Maybe I would suggest, I think if they already have a project running, get into some kind of a static code analysis on a more serious basis, right? And I think be very, very wary of whatever the open source component they use in their project. In case they are being used, they must be scanned for vulnerabilities. I think that is will be a good starting point for those people.
Yeah, just
sounds good. Thank you. And we've dropped some links to code scanning and things like that in the Q&A. But that's all we have time for today. So I'm going to pass it back to Amol to wrap this up. And thank you all for answering all the questions from our community.
Thanks, Mish. I'm sorry. I know there are a lot of questions. We probably would try and get back to you all, offline. But thank you so much, everybody. This is the end of session. Thanks, Hilal. Thanks, Deepak. Amazing session. Thanks, audience. Just to recap, I'm sure you've taken something from here today when we talked about, DevSecOps with respect to shifting security left, with respect to empowering developers, with respect to giving developers a better experience, learnings, trainings, and I think the gamification part of it. So I think it was all important and very meaningful to all of you. So I think we have some highlights. We have some more sessions coming up for you all today. So today we have another session, which is scale your security with global community of security research. My colleagues Brent and Shalomi would be handling that. We have tomorrow we have another sessions for you, which is more on the efficient and collaborative timelines, fireside chat, how to increase developer productivity by investing in more efficient tooling. This is hosted by Fathan and featuring Commonwealth Bank, Udan, KPMG Tokyo. So amazing sessions for you all. We also have reduced tech stack complexity with GitHub. This is hosted by Karthik and Shilpa. We'll be sending a follow-up email once sessions are available to watch on demand. So keep an eye for this in your inbox. Before we wrap up, folks, I would like a deeper dive on anything we covered here today. In case you want to know more about it, just click on the book a meeting button on right top of your screen and we'll get in touch with you very, very shortly. Lastly, please take just a minute or two to complete a short survey about your experience with us today. You'll find the link to that survey in the Documents tab at the right of your screen in the resources or in the chat. We designed this program for you and want to be sure that you're getting the most value out of your time here. We do take this feedback and our learnings to optimize our future programs to continue to raise the bar for you. So don't be shy. Tell us what you think. And with that, thank you all for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you all the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.